Okay, so we all have learned throughout this track the importance of measurement. But what about evolving your KPIs and such so that they are more in tune with what you're doing, particularly in an agile delivery environment? Well, our friend Arjit is going to talk to us a little bit about that coming up next.
So thank you so much. And firstly, a very good morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on where you are. So I'm going to be talking about how to use KPIs, and that too in an agile delivery environment. But before we dive into it, a quick introduction about myself. I am into this industry for the last 23 odd years, working with Agile since almost the very beginning. I didn't even know what is Agile, but I was working with Scrum. So it so happened that in the process, I got to know Scrum and the associated artifacts a bit more with time. And today I would be trying to share the same understanding with you all. Now, a few clarifications before I jump into it. This is not a prescriptive session. So I'm not going to give you a prescription that this is how your KPIs should look like, because it is context driven. Our objective is to invoke thoughts on what, how, and why we should measure. So basically, we are going to try what we are going to measure, how we are going to measure, and why we should measure this in the first place. And I should be giving this disclaimer that I use this word, this particular phrase, that agile delivery environment. On its own, it doesn't really make much sense. But what I'm trying to refer over here is any ambience, any circumstances, any situation where we are trying to use Scrum. So when I talk about Scrum, it's the standard 353 kind of a structure. And we are not going to be restricting ourselves only to IT. So it is across industries. Lastly, and very importantly, be with me. It is past midnight for me. It is 1:05 in the morning. So be with me. Otherwise, you can see what may happen. Now, to give you the background of this talk, how do we use KPIs? I mean, it's kind of a cliche that every time now and then, although the Agile Manifesto for Software Development came out in 2001, even today we are struggling to identify what should be correct KPIs. And many times they come up with very weird KPIs to measure. But should it be like that? Now, if you see traditionally, I mean, it doesn't really matter whether it is about software, it is about any other industry, or whether it is about agile or non-agile. End of the day, business is always keen to understand few specific parameters. They want to understand how those parameters could be leveraged, measured, so that they can better predict how their investment is going to give them the return. So the triangle, the golden triangle that we all know, or sometimes we also call it the iron triangle, that scope, the time, and the budget, the cost, it should be all on time. So we generally say that it should be delivered on time, on spec, and on budget without compromising on the quality. So this picture is kind of pretty well known to all of us. Now, time has changed, but of course, basic needs, they don't change. They still remain quite valid. But with time, what has changed and what we should also change proactively is about our perception, how we are going to measure it, what we are going to measure it, and to understand deep inside that why we are measuring it. Because if we don't understand the why part of it, it is going to be not very meaningful. So let us try and figure out this what, how, and why, how they work hand in hand. So we will start with the what part of it. Now, as we all know, that KPIs, the key performance indicators. Now, I struggled to understand that, key performance indicator for whose performance? Is it the individuals who are building something, or is it the individuals who are going to use it? How and why we are going to measure those? But let us first start by understanding that what we are going to measure. I have highlighted the word what because many times, even if you are a fan of Simon Sinek, he says that, start with why. But we are taking a deviation over here and we are going to start with what. So whenever we are asking about KPIs, the first question that comes to our mind is, what is the measure? what should I be measuring in the first place? Very simplistically looking at it, we are only going to measure things which are going to help us deliver on time, remove or eliminate all the possible waste. And the speaker just before me, he was talking about lean. So lean talks about around moving waste. How do we improve the quality? With time, as situation becomes more complex, as we start delivering more complex software or even different products, how do we ensure that quality is not compromised? How do we reduce the cycle time so that our customer don't have to wait for a lengthy period of time? Just imagine if you and I we go to the supermarket and at the cash counter, if we have to wait for a long queue, we will not like it. It won't be a good customer experience. So how do we remove or reduce the cycle time? How do we increase the satisfaction for the customer? And all the different parameter comes in: user experience, user journey, user personas. Those things comes into the picture. Why we are trying to do all these things? Because we want to stay ahead of our competition. And very importantly, if you really summarize all these points, we are actually trying to either make or save money. So this picture may be resembling the summary of all these points that we discussed. Where is the money? So show us the money. And if we really drive ourselves toward that, towards the objective of either earning more or saving more, we would understand what we have to measure. But while we do so, we do have to be a bit careful. And if you're familiar with this gentleman, Goodhart's law, now, well, of course, there are some doubts around it, whether it was Goodhart who himself did this or it was done by someone else. But the point is, the law states that when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. And there are plenty of stories around it. Probably I will just walk you through one. I'm not too sure whether you have heard about this Cobra Effect. Now, in real life, God forbid, I mean, the Cobra is not as friendly as it looks like on the picture. Now, it so happened in a suburban area, probably in some place in India, probably. There were, millions of cobra. The population was, growing exponentially, and the government had to do something about it. So what they did is they announced a cash prize. If you give us the cobra heads, for every few heads, you are going to get so and so much of money. So it was a cash reward, and probably it will remind you of Dan Pink's motivation video that you do something, you get this kind of a reward. So that is something which was in play. But very soon, what happened is, looking into the reward, people started, instead of hunting down the cobras, they actually started farming cobras. So although it was a good intention, eventually it turned out to be quite a opposite factor over here. So instead of going down, the count actually increased. Now, it's a very simple 1, 2, 3 steps. There is a cause, there is an effect. So whatever we are trying to measure, we have to be very careful that that measure is not going to become a target for the team, which will drive the entire objective in the other way or in the reverse direction. So we are hopefully clear about what we are going to do, what we are going to measure. So the simple solution, just to recap, we are going to measure things which are going to help us either earn more revenue or save some cost. So either way, we are going to make more profit for the organization. Now, we talked about several of the measures, and one of the measure was deliver on time, because we wanted to ensure that we are delivering on time within budget as per the spec, ensuring the quality. So let us assume that we have identified the what part of it. And we are going to take this example. The what goal of ours is deliver on time. That's a good starting point. We have identified what needs to be done, what we are going to measure. This is our target goal. Now the question comes in, how are we going to achieve this goal? And once we decide that how we are going to achieve this goal, next comes the point that how are we going to measure that? Now, don't judge me by what you're going to see in the screen now. I will explain that gradually, so bear with me. Now, when we say that our goal is to deliver on time, we may come up with this idea that, let us work extra hours. Because if we put in extra hours, we are definitely going to be deliver it on time. And if hopefully we may deliver it ahead of time. So that may be a very good idea. I don't know. Some may come up with the idea that let us do a better estimation. Now, when we do a good estimation, how do we measure whether the estimation that we derive, whether those were good or bad or not so good? So one of the approach could be we track the committed versus the delivered or user story. So if the team had really done a due diligence and they had done a good job in estimating their stories, then they would know that what is their capacity, what is the time box within which they are going to deliver. So accordingly, they should hopefully be able to commit as per the estimation within those boundaries. So they should be able to follow and fulfill those. Of course, for a team who is new, there will be initial, struggle, but gradually they will be getting the habit of it. Another concept may come in that we have to deliver on time. Let us keep on adding more and more member to the team. Probably keep on adding more teams altogether. If that becomes a scenario, then probably we are going to count our scaling factor, that how soon can we scale, or how soon can we scale the number of teams, or how fast can we add or ramp up our team members. We may introduce test automation, and if that is the case, then we may try and judge in terms of measuring what is our automation coverage. 60%, 70%, 80%, probably aiming for 100%, could be. Reducing cycle time, it could be about control charts. So the control charts would allow you to figure out whether you are within the range or you are going outside. Similarly, identifying defects early and reducing the defect counts in the dev environment, that could also be one of the measures. Identify dependencies, and we all know that how the parent-child relationships, the start to finish, finish to start, all those dependencies come up. We can reduce that by ensuring our backlogs are properly refined. Now, problem with this is not all of these measures are good. Some are good, some are okay, and some are quite absurd, to be honest. So they don't really make much sense. More importantly, some of the measures would give a counterproductivity. To give you an example, in the traditional world, a tester, when he or she is working on identifying the defects, his or her productivity would typically be measured in terms of how many defects he or she is logging. Now, if I am a tester and if I am doing a good job identifying the defects and logging and registering number of defects in the system, my manager would come and say, wow, you are doing a great, fabulous job. But the concept has changed. We are not going to be judging based on that. Rather, instead of letting the defects pass into the testing environment, we are going to ensure that the defects don't come up in the very first place. So now the measure switches. And these are the traditional, shift left kind of a concept. When the developers are working, the testers are working in pair to understand where are the possible opportunities their defects can surface, and we are trying to prevent it at the very onset. So you see the perspective, the perception of what should be measured and how it should be measured, that is changing, and that is where we have to move forward. Similarly, many a times, hopefully not too many in current scenario, but even a few years back, we used to see many organizations going by how many kilocks of lines of codes we are building, we are writing. Now, writing numerous lines of code doesn't necessarily mean we are doing a fabulous job. Similar activity, similar functionality could be done by a very small number of lines of code, and that could mean we are doing a better job. Why should we be measuring that? Similarly, if you're thinking in terms of test automation coverage, are we really focusing on the quality of the test automation? Without having enough good quality tests written, if we're just trying to blindly achieve some kind of a code coverage, it's not going to help any one of us. So we have to be very careful about what we are going to measure. So we have to understand, why do we measure? What do we intend to measure? Now, you see, some of the measures we have to follow because it's a necessity. Many a times, we are told to follow certain measures. Now, for example, this pandemic situation, we are told that you have to follow these specific measures. Understood. But in projects, in an agile working environment, if you are following something blindly, it may not be the best solution for us. So we have to understand why we are measuring. Now, of course, there is a saying that unless until you measure something, how can you improve? But yes, let us go beyond that. So quite honestly, we measure because to avoid knowing something too late. If we know it too late, we really won't have time to work upon it or fix it. We want to measure because we want to avoid knowing very less. Unless until we really get to know about any details, how would we be rectifying it? Because we won't be understanding the problem at the core of it. We would be only able to solve it symptomatically, not the core problem. And we have to know the right problems in the first place. But in spite of all this reasoning, one reason which comes very important that we have to measure because we have to do something about it. So just imagine, I mean, let us move away from this IT world. Let us just imagine we go to some, medical center, we go for a full body checkup, we get some results out of it, and we just ignore it. Forget about it. We are not going to do anything. Now, if you're not going to do anything about the results, the measures that came out of it, why did we measure it in first place? So many a times what we see is we measure too many different things, but we really don't do much about it. And if that is the case, let us be very careful that does it really make sense to measure it? Now, we went through that, what we are going to measure, how we are going to measure, why we are going to measure. Let us now elaborate the how part of it. Now, when we are going to measure, we have to wear certain lenses. Now, what I mean by that is we have to have specific views. And this is something which I learned from Dr. Jeff Sutherland as part of the Scrum at Scale curriculum, that the lens could be largely categorized into four segments. One is about productivity. One is about the value we are delivering to our customers. One is about the quality that we are going to deliver to our customers. And very importantly, sustainability. Now, this can be run through in scales. In fact, in Scrum at Scale, it actually runs through a particular day. I mean, it's a 2-day workshop, and it takes a lot of time to run through it. But I will try to map it to a very simplistic, example. So let us think that we are now going to measure, instead of all these parameters, we are now going to measure from a different perspective altogether. Let us take the perspective of a customer or the consumer, and let us replace the KPI with CPI, or the consumer performance indicator. Now, if that is the case, in the prior slide, we went through 4 different lenses. We spoke about productivity, value delivery, quality, and sustainability. Now, if you look into it, if you put that customer lens, how customer is going to be benefited, and if you go back to the slide talking about show me the money, you will see these are all linked. And putting the lens, you see productivity. Improved productivity literally boils down to reduced cost for the consumer. Similarly, when you are delivering value, that means we are optimizing the services that we are going to deliver. When we are delivering quality, we are ensuring that the better product is being handed over to the customers or the consumers. Similarly, when you are talking about sustainability, we are only talking about continuity of our support, our services. Now, if I try to sum it all up, and if I try to present it, and I'm sure that we have all been through a lot of presentations, a lot of dashboards with all the flashy, colorful, different charts and widgets, let us be very careful about the fact that this brilliant economist and psychologist, Dr. Simon, had said that a wealth of information creates a poverty of attention. So whatever we are trying to portray, let us be very careful that are those really going to be meaningful enough, or are we simply bombarding the screen with too much of data which no one is going to bother about? So let us look into this dashboard. It's a colorful dashboard, looks nice, number of gadgets, different kinds of elements. But if you really look deep into it, one of the elements is about story completion. Does it really make sense? Because the team, we are talking about 3 different teams, team A, team B, and team C, and they are working on across 4 different sprints, and they are all delivering 100% committed user stories. So if that is the case, Does it really make sense? Similarly, these two charts, they are kind of portraying the same information. So do we really need that? We are talking about the story points delivered by teams. Now, problem is story point delivered by individual teams, it hardly matters because story point is very close to individual teams. It doesn't relate to each other. So why should we be presenting that at all? Rather, we can give a summary that altogether three teams delivered so many story points worth of work, even better with business values. Similarly, there is a green light indicating the status of the reports, but is it really green? Or how do I understand that it is actually green? Just because it is on the screen, it has been portrayed as green. Do I have to buy it? So let us look into something which is rather healthy, rather than overburdening the screen. Can it be much simpler? So a simplistic solution could be we present velocity. Now, velocity could be a combination of different teams, or if we are talking about an individual team, how that team has performed. And this chart shows that yes, the team has been performing steadily and it is going towards a positive direction, a good sign. So we are taking the delta velocity. If we take into consideration the delta revenue and we are taking the quarter into account, hopefully that we have had multiple releases in between, which has created positive impact on the market, which is reflecting into our stocks. So the company is seeing a greater revenue generation for the organization. This is also happening to be in the positive direction. It's a good sign. Think about the happiness part of it. Happiness could be team morale, how they are feeling. Are they enthusiastic enough? Or similarly, are they having enough technical debt or have they been able to manage it down under a very reasonable and controlled volume? Considering those, all these three parameters in consideration in together, uh, then we can bring down a conclusion and hypothesis probably. This team is working okay, they're doing well. Now, if we take all the learnings together, probably the key takeaway from this session would be that when we are trying to measure any performance through the KPIs, the first and a very important step is to identify for the project or the program or the portfolio or for the organization, what is the target state? What is our objective? What is our goals? Then we have to set a very few, but very well chosen, very well thought of measures, which very carefully are not going to become targets. We have to make them transparent because transparency is key and we are working on Scrum. And then we have to review them periodically. Are those measures really helping us to drive improvement? It's a Kaizen, it's a continuous improvement process. And once we do so, then we have to continuously rinse and repeat. It's kind of iterative flow. And that is the essence of Scrum. So saying that, I will stop. We are towards the end of the session. If you have any questions, I would love that. We can take it later on separately, or we can use the Slack channel and we can discuss it. And once again, I would thank the organizer for having me. It was a wonderful experience, and thank you so much.
Arjit, thank you so much. Though I'm not going to lie, the notion of a Cobra farm is sort of the stuff nightmares are made of. But great session. I love the idea of really thinking about and considering what you measure, because in the end, people are going to perform to what they're measured on. So really considering that and thinking about it is important. So please join Arjit in the Slack channel, ask him some questions, and have a good little break in between the next session.